Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Adobe Live. My name is Howard Pinsky. I'm a senior XD evangelist here at Adobe, joined by the one and only Julian Crespo. How are you?
Hello, doing well.
You're no stranger to Adobe Live.
I've been here.
You've been here.
Yeah, I'm familiar to the studio.
Yeah, and if you are just joining us, we've been live. Not me and Julian, but
Right.
Adobe Live has been live for about 20. No, well, we will be live for about 24 hours, but we've been live for a long time.
Hopefully you haven't been watching, or you have been watching the whole entire time.
Maybe. We started in Australia, we went to Germany, and now we're here in the US talking all about trust and responsibility, and it's for IDXX. A lot of cool stuff. And Julian is going to take things over in just a moment, talking all about accessibility, which definitely kind of relates to that whole theme. But before we get into that, we have a lot. If you missed some of it, go back and watch some of that stuff. Really great stuff. We just finished with Lindsay and Josh, and then I'm sitting down with Julian. We've got the XD Daily Challenge with Andrea, who's also taking a little bit of a trust and accessibility spin to things, which is fun. We've got Margot coming up after that, and then we've got Daniela and Cameron. So a lot of good stuff coming up. And a big good morning, afternoon, or good evening to everyone joining live on Behance. If you are tuning in, let us know how long you've been tuning in for and where you're tuning in from. We're live in San Francisco right now. Hello to everyone. I'm not going to go through all of the people's names because we only have half an hour. So I'm going to hand it over to Julian, and he's just going to run through things. I'm just going to sit here and
I got a lot of stuff prepared for you.
Go for it.
So today we're going to be talking about trust and responsibility, but more specifically, accessibility best practices. And so for me, this is something that I've been really deep in as far as like building a plugin here at Adobe during the Accelerator program, which maybe some of you have might seen some of the stuff, but I'm going to be showing that a little bit later. But let's kind of talk about some of these best practices. And the first thing I want to start off with is just like some principles. And there's an acronym for this, and it's POUR. And the first of which is perceivable. So we're jumping right into this. Is like, what is perceivable on the web? There's sight, there's hearing, there's touch, transformability, content versus style, and presentation. So if you think about sight, it's what can be seen as far as text, your images, the video and your components, and your hearing is like your feedback as far as like notifications and the sound that emits, and then also like how that translates to closed captioning. And then touch is like the context of texture and the affordances of objects, whether it's a screen or braille interfaces and things like that. And then transformability is like text-to-speech and voice recognition and haptics and these types of experiences. And so we also just, as designers, can know that it's not always screen, right? We're not always designing for screen. There are a whole bunch of other interfaces out there that we can design for. And then thinking about how to abstract our experiences into how we interact with voice and how haptics can actually like help us through the world in other ways and give us an understanding of our place and what we're interacting with. There's operable, so your input methods, your interaction methods, user control over limits, and error recovery. So like the ability to make a mistake but know that you can recover, which is something that we take for granted sometimes because we can easily go back and fix things, but someone that has a disability, it's a little harder to recover if you lose all the work you've done because it takes a lot of time. Things need to be understandable. So this is stepping away a little bit from the accessibility that you might think of for like mobility or vision, but thinking about like, is what you're making accessible? But does that mean it's useful? Not always, right? Mm-hmm. So you can have something that's built accessible, but if the language is inappropriate or not approachable, or you're using a strange mix of colloquial local language, maybe that doesn't apply. So understanding language is really important. And your functionality is just a way for you to understand how the navigation actually is labeled clearly, and are things predictable, and can you understand them? And then robust, making sure that things can scale across different technologies. This is super important because you understand that we have Mac OS, we have Windows, we have all these other environments. Don't be overwhelmed, but at the same time, be acknowledged that there are different types of interfaces and assistive technologies that people use, like JAWS, and NVIDIA, and VoiceOver. There's also understanding that using your technologies on the specification is trying not to implement for the previous versions of technology and try to understand future use. You don't want to build backwards, you want to build forwards.
Absolutely. And I feel like all of this is so incredibly important because I'm just thinking of all the apps that I use on a daily basis. And many of them, I would probably argue, are not accessible. Maybe the operating system, iOS has done a great job in making sure there's accessibility. But the applications themselves, and I feel like, even talking to designers, that's not on the top of their mind.
No.
But it should be. Because you were telling me stories a few weeks ago when we were talking about people who are just have such a difficult time using very basic applications.
Right.
And things that they need, something like a lift sharing or a ride sharing application, that's like one of their main modes of transportation.
Yeah.
And that has to be accessible.
And if you can't access the location of your map, like while you're in a ride, then that's problematic, right? Like not understanding where you are in space and time is something that we take for granted.
Yep.
But it's something that we can see ahead of time and build for.
And that's an interesting point because many people, when they think of something like a ride-sharing application, right, they think, okay, well, the person needs to be able to say or enter somehow a destination and then need to leave, right? But what about everything in between?
Right.
We don't think of these things off the top of our heads. Like, what if they have to access something when they're in the ride? What if they have a problem?
Yeah.
They need to be able to navigate through this application and make changes if necessary.
That's exactly right, and that's like the power of design, right?
Yep.
If you're able to put yourself in the perspective of others and design with people instead of design for people, and that's a big idea for the edge case design. And the term edge case design might seem like a buzzword, but it's actually very important.
Yep.
And it's the most useful designs prepare for the unexpected. And that's something that if you approach design on an inclusive side, then you can understand how to design for people with extreme conditions. And that means that everybody else might benefit from that design that you implemented that is for the extreme case. And there's a lot of examples where that could be the case, and I'm going to show some of those in a second.
Great.
And then understanding how that kind of plays into the idea of functional limitation, and it's it's a universal experience that we all might experience in our lifetime. We don't have our vision forever, maybe. Like it might get a little fuzzy as we get older, and so thinking about temporary situations as well, where you might have a situation where I was here during the summer, and a designer that I know broke his arm, and that's not easy to do when you're a designer, right? Like, how do you design with a broken arm?
Right.
And so there are situations where the environment conflicts with your ability, and you need to understand as a designer how can you think about those things in those before they happen. Like a lot of it is like foretelling, but if you can, then there's a lot of opportunity there, right? And so thinking a little bit more about inclusive design for a checklist, if you're a designer looking to build accessibly, I prepared this checklist, and it is available that we will share, so that way you can actually have this checklist to use, and you can come back and reference it whenever you'd like. But these are just some understanding of what the appropriate contrast is, like a 4.5 to 1 ratio for the minimum visual presentation of text and images to meet that AA standard. You always want to shoot for a AAA standard, but AA standard will get you there. And then understanding that the 3 to 1 ratio is what you need to use for large scale text and images. And then just kind of throwing in the incidentals for like inactive elements that they don't necessarily need to have a requirement, and logo types, they don't also need requirements, because there are other ways to call those out in your assistive technology, and there's other dependencies for your logo types. And if you're interested in getting some tools to analyze your design, there's one that you can get from the 2 links there. Stark is probably the most widely used one here at Adobe. They have a great plugin that works great. There's a paid version. There's also a free version for you to use. And they also have a color blindness simulator, which you can also grab and play with. Some really great tools there for you. And then moving on to content, and how important is headings and hierarchy. And understanding that your H1, H2s, your paragraphs, and all of these, they're not just design decoration.
Right. And it's something that I think a lot of beginner designers, they see H1, H2, they just associate with H1, okay, that's big.
Yes.
H2, a little bit smaller. H3, a little bit smaller. H4, tiny. And
so,
that's really all they think about, right?
Yeah, and H3 is like the most skipped.
Yes.
It's like, because you're like struggling to find a fit for that decoration.
Yeah.
Those are not decoration, they're actually navigation structures.
Absolutely.
And so understanding that is very important. And then going down to semantic HTML and content. This is very important for you to understand your flow and what your intended flow is. And I'll show you an example of how that conflicts with screen readers. Content relevance. The biggest problem with web interfaces for people that are blind is there's too much information.
Oh gosh.
Right? Like we have the ability to scan a page, but we also have the power to negate and ignore things that aren't relevant.
Right. Like ads that are floating all over the place, like banners, like everything that's not the content that you're there to watch, or see. We see this all the time.
Right.
Even on mobile, which should be a cleaner experience, we now see these pop-ups and these things that are just in our face. We have to swipe them away.
Yep.
And then maybe we'll get to the content. And when we do get to the content, there's like a read more button. We have to expand that and we get some of the content. Then there's 17 pages you have to swipe through. It's like, what is going on?
And imagine that for a screen reader.
Oh gosh,
like it's not easy.
No.
It's not easy to navigate. So trying to do more of understanding the relevance of your experience and just kind of paring it down. And then I think for me, what's really important is context and providing alt tags and alt descriptions to your images is really important. And hopefully we can get into the point where machines can be better at doing that for us, because sometimes it's hard to describe what's going on in an image.
Absolutely.
And a video, right? And I'll show you an example of like how video descriptions are kind of progressing as well.
Yeah.
And then call to action clarity, making sure that your CTAs are very clearly identifiable. Like this is something that seems standard, but it's something that we could kind of forget sometimes. And then zooming in on UX and trying that. And if you can zoom in at 200% and seeing what happens, preparing for that is good.
Yeah. And that's also very important because I've noticed, I think there's one major social media service, I'm not gonna name them, but every time I zoom in, one of the sidebars just like pops on, it covers up the main screen.
Yeah.
I'm not very old, I have pretty good eyesight, but sometimes I like to zoom in just to read a little bit better, read the text a little bit better, but things can't be popping up in my way.
And then test that, right? And then test it not only on an iPhone for iOS, but test it on an Android, test it on a Mac, on a Windows machine. That way your environments match, right?
Absolutely.
And so I actually provided some resources so you know that this isn't just coming from like my brain. This is stuff that I researched, and you can grab these. Some of these references are just also good to keep inside like your head and just kind of lock inside your head. My daughter likes to say, lock it in your head. That way you remember it.
Yeah. And Bahar is asking if this is going to be available for download later.
Yeah. So I will make sure that it hits the channel so you can take this in or upload it to Discord. We'll figure out a way to get it to you, and we'll have it shared for sure. Yeah. So that's my thing on my checklist that I prepared. So I'm going to show you just some quick understandings of like how you can navigate with a screen reader. And so let's give you a quick demo.
VoiceOver on Chrome, the Home Depot, Google.
And so
link,
for anyone that has
decor,
done
link,
this,
wall accent link, wall art. You are currently link, canvas link,
so
wall
this is
murals,
already
visited link, the Home Depot link, store link, truck link.
So if I'm
for the
trying to
pro,
find something,
link, gift link, crit link.
this is what
link,
I got to go through.
Link, visited link, required invalid data, edit text.
Right.
You are currently on a text field inside LWS.
So I'm trying to find a drill.
Field, search results for drills at the Home Depot web content. 58% link.
And now I'm back at the top.
Link. Truck link.
And this is going to take a long
link,
time.
That's
Right?
not very
Services,
accessible.
VoiceOver off.
So that's one example. But then if I go to something like
VoiceOver on Chrome.
Gap.
Shop Gap for casual women's. Visited link. Skip to top navigation.
they do this really great thing
You are
that's skip
currently on a
links.
link. Link. Skip to shopping bag. You are currently visited link. Skip to top navigation. You are currently on a link. New arrivals pop-up button.
That's
List
so I
10
can
items.
navigate.
Down,
I don't need to
pop-up
see
button.
it.
Right.
Women pop-up button. Maternity pop-up button. Men pop-up button.
That's what I want.
You are currently on a pop-up button. To display
I
a list of
expose
options,
the menu.
press control link. Shop haul style link. New arrivals. Visited link. Jeans. Visited link. Pants.
All right.
You are currently
that
on a
sounds
link.
good.
To click this link, press Control, Option, men's pants, vertical line, gap, web
And then
content,
I'm
to visited, link, skip to side navigation.
Able to get
You are
around
currently on
a
a link
lot easier.
inside of 281
Interesting.
items in the
So that's
product
just an
grid. Close
example
the category
of
accordion,
how you
expanded
can
button, list
think
4 items,
about
level 2, voiceover off.
your navigation ahead of time.
And in thinking of these two examples, right? You've got Home Depot and you have Gap. What do you think when they were designing this? What do you think the difference? Why is Gap so much stronger in experience than Home Depot?
So they actually I worked with someone that that contracted to make that happen a lot more efficiently, and it is still playing into the idea of designing with someone that has that disability, someone that navigates a web page in a way that they need a little bit more assistance. And it might also just be like I think it's the designers that are in these teams. Some teams don't have the inclusive design team that understands.
Right.
And I think, so like what I'm gonna show you now is kind of maybe answer that question of like how to make it happen. Is a lot of it is through annotations and making sure that there are the appropriate metadata attached to your objects to understand what developers are getting from designers and what's the intended flow. We have an intended flow for the visuals, but what is the intended flow for the assistive technology?
Right.
And so this is kind of, this is what I worked on this summer here at Adobe. It's a plugin. Ooh, this guy doesn't want to play. That's weird. All right, so I'm just gonna do it like this. So I designed a plugin.
Command Enter.
Command Enter. Boom.
Do you have a play window somewhere else?
Maybe. Oh, that's what I do have. Oh, Pinsky.
There it is.
You are the best. Okay, so Ally is a plugin that empowers designers to create accessible web experiences within Adobe XD. And so would you be surprised if I told you that only 1% of the web meets the minimum accessibility standards?
Surprised it's that high, actually.
Yeah, and so this is 1 million of the top visited homepages were analyzed by a tool that checked for discrepancies for accessibility. And this is the stat that was revealed. Now, granted, 85% of this problem are contrast and color, like we talked about.
Right.
Which is like a very easy, not an easy problem, it's still a big problem to tackle, but it's something that is for visual people. But how do you design for people that are non-visual, right? And so the closer we look at the problem, we learn that we can make a huge impact by understanding the navigation of the content and understanding that there are people with accessibility needs that rely on assistive technology. And there's a lot of them. There's screen readers, there's braille interfaces, there's switches. it's switches and joysticks, single switches. And this represents 1 billion people. So there's 10,000 web pages that are accessible to 1 billion people.
Oof.
And that just doesn't seem right? And it's like this isn't a problem that is like accessibility like isn't a hot topic. It's an important topic.
Absolutely.
It's something that our physical world has been adapting for quite some time, and it still fails in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But our digital worlds where we live a lot are not being considered the same way. And so how can we fix that? And that's the big question that I wanted to address. So my concept that I created for this plugin was landmarks, and this is the first primer on just kind of showing you what things that you can do. So what you want to do is designate regions on your web page that are like represent bigger stops along the way. So L1, L2, L3, these are sections of your web page that you need to document. And focus order is your linear logic for the flow that you're intending. And so this is calling out areas of your web page that need to follow that path. And that is all documented by the designer. And so, let me go back here. Yeah, and then the last one is ARIA. And so ARIA roles are ways to attach metadata to objects that let the screen reader know what is this element that I'm interacting with and what is its behavior. And so there are different dependencies for something that's like a list box. A list box reveals a pop down or a drop down, however you want to call it. And then that has another linear logic that you need to attach to that, right? So we know that if you get to the tab that's creativity and design, that there's a drop down that follows another path that's depending on that, right? And so who's responsible right?
That's a good question.
Who is
it
it-
the designer's responsibility? Is it the web developer's responsibility? It could land on anyone's plate, right? Or is it a collaboration?
I think it needs to be collaborative.
Yeah.
But currently, it's very ambiguous. There's a lot of indecision on who is responsible for this, and because of that, we do have teams that design teams that are documenting this process. But a big problem is that it's a manual process, and it takes a long time to document.
Yep.
And they use forms like this, and it's not easy to use a form like this to document your experiences. And it just takes a long time, and if you don't practice it regularly, you kind of lose it, and it's something that takes some time to do. So what happens is developers end up carrying the load, and this is not an ideal situation because they have a lot of work already, and they do what anybody else does when they have a problem that they run into, and they Google.
Right.
And this is not the most efficient way to work around your problems.
Nope.
And so how can we create a better system for people that need to ingest this information? And so I'm going to show you my demo.
All right.
And so the plugin that I designed is it utilizes the panel, which is, I think, super important. The plugin panel is 100% necessary for this to work. And so what we do is we're able to select an artboard and add elements. That's a little broken. And then we're able to, I pulled in other things. So let me show you. So then once you're able to annotate your documentation specs, you can then create. This isn't the right one. This could be.
It happens.
It happens.
Got about 2 minutes left before we wrap things up and pass it on.
Oh no. Okay. So yeah, this is it generates a spec report once you've created like your cards for every individual layer.
Yep.
You're able to then see what you've created in your landmarks, and then you're able to export that. And that comes out as a document that the developer then takes and ingests that information.
Interesting.
But what you can also do is an idea of generating a web page that spits out an accessibility tree. And what this does is it gives you all the information relevant to your assistive technology to then skip around your content to then have a screen reader experience in a browser.
Yep.
And so those are like super important for what you want to navigate for. And we don't have too much time, but I'll put these links up, and these are some new technologies to help understand how you can be a part of this experience. Joining the community of Be My Eyes, so you can actually be a representative that helps people. This app actually has a camera that shows the real world to the person that has a visual impairment by a translator on the other end.
Oh, interesting.
So like I can sign up and provide support by explaining what's around someone's area.
Yeah.
And then there's more high-tech versions that have glasses. UDescribe gives you video descriptions, and you can be a generator to describe videos in this community. Speak to See is a really great one to like translate text in real time and spit out transcriptions, which is great for people that are deaf.
Yep.
And then learning Morse. And you can then like have these applets that create Morse, and you can learn how to actually communicate with Morse code. And then of course the Xbox Adaptive Control is like, I think, a quintessential example of accessibility on a inclusive design use case.
Absolutely.
And how to use different inputs.
Yeah, and if we had more time, Alex actually has a great question about budgets and who pays for this.
Yeah.
And how do you prioritize some of that stuff? But that's a whole other
That's
conversation.
a really big conversation.
Very important conversation. But where can they follow you on Twitter so they can keep up with some of this stuff?
I'm at Hidden Jewels on Twitter and everywhere. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Julian Crespo. Search me, I'm there too.
Nice. And we're going to try our best to continue this conversation at some point in the future, because I think accessibility is so important going forward.
Right.
And there's no reason why it shouldn't be tackled, right?
Right. No, I think it is being tackled. It's just the community needs to be a little bit more collaborative
Absolutely.
and open-minded about like working together to solve
Yep.
this big problem.
I agree. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Make sure to follow Julian to keep up to date on all that fun stuff, and stick around. We've got more streams coming up.